Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you are doing well. It is really bright and sunny here in Redmond, Washington. As I'm recording this, it feels like summer already. I hope you are enjoying the sun and the heat wherever you are. I wanted to start off by acknowledging that I know I have taken a slightly longer break from podcasting in the past couple of weeks. I did end up traveling to teach at the Sedona Yoga Festival, and then I traveled for some personal things, and then the studios just took over. But I am back. I am back on the podcast, back on my weekly schedule. I am very mindful to not just post episodes on the podcast for the sake of putting episodes out here. We have about 118 episodes available. So I don't want to create content for the sake of creating content. I want it for it to be valuable, relatable for you and for the investment of your time and effort, and same on my part. Okay, so hopefully we are back on our weekly programming schedule. I'm also back on Instagram. I was so turned off by reels, honestly, for yoga, because there's not much you can communicate in a reel, and the real important stuff is not necessarily algorithm friendly. So I have kind of moved away from the reel format. I've gone back to doing good old posts. And if you've been watching, you've seen me go at it on Instagram this past week. But what I really want you to go see on Instagram is the community and the engagement in the comment section. You'll find so much support there, and like-minded people, and conversations, and opportunities for growth for yourself there, and reflection. So that's happening as well. I have a lot of things coming up, okay, in the weeks and months ahead, including something very exciting on the podcast, which I will announce later, probably next week. Okay. But speaking of new things coming up, I'm hosting a free workshop on May 16th. And I know you're getting very little heads up on the podcast here for it, but I've announced it before. It's been on the newsletters and on Instagram. The workshop is called 10 Ways to Elevate Your Yoga Class. And it's open to yoga teachers of all levels, whether you just started teaching, you want to teach, or you've been teaching for many years. We're going to look at, because people start with asana, how can we really engage our students? How can we offer them better quality asana classes? How do we teach them about greater yoga? Okay. That is the main focus. How do we teach them that yoga is so much more than asana without losing context of the goals and the needs of the students who come to those classes? So it's a free workshop. It's May 16th, Tuesday morning, Pacific time, 9 a.m. It's on Zoom, and make sure you sign up by Monday, end of day, because enrollments will close. For those of you who do sign up beforehand and you're not unable to attend live, I'll send out the recording later in the day. But I highly encourage you to show up for these type of things live, because you get to interact, you get to engage with community. It makes such a difference when you are there live versus watching it in recording. It can be more immersive when it's live. Okay, so if you can't make it, I'll send out the recording, but it would be wonderful to see some of you in person on Zoom on Tuesday. The link for signing up for this workshop is available in only a few places. Look at the podcast description. In the link section, you should find the link to sign up for this workshop. It's also available in our show notes and in my Instagram handle. I also want you to be on the bite-sized bi-monthly newsletter. 3 of these have already gone out. I love reading your responses. It's one of my favorite things to do every second Friday and fourth Friday of the month, when I send it out and you react and respond and send back your comments. Each issue of the newsletter is linked. So issue 2 is linked to 1, 3 is linked to 2. And in many ways, I think of it as free teacher training, free teacher development resources in your inbox every couple of weeks. So make sure you are on that. Whether you come to the free workshop or not, make sure you are on the newsletter. I will also be announcing so many other things, including more free workshops coming up. Everything goes on the newsletter first. I know it's been a slightly longer intro than you are used to, but I just wanted to get some of these things up here and out. So we're done, and then we can focus on our topic. Speaking of our topic today, we're looking at Ahimsa. And this came to my mind because I was writing content for one of my upcoming immersive programs. And it wasn't meant to be a podcast episode, if I'm being very honest. But sometimes when I'm just inspired and I think this will add value to you, I just turn on the microphone and I start recording. And that's kind of what I did today. Okay? Today, we're going to look at what is Ahimsa in depth. We'll explore the meaning of the word Ahimsa. And we'll talk about how to really implement it on the mat as yoga teachers, not as students as much, but as yoga teachers, how to bring this to our students, and then how to help them take it off their mat into their lives. And then lastly, and most importantly, how do you know that you are actually living Ahimsa as a life principle? What are the changes you should see and expect in yourself? That is what I'm most excited about to share with you on this podcast. Okay, so let's get to it.
Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in.
So let's start by understanding the term Ahimsa. Once you have clear context, you will be able to dive deeper more effortlessly. Now, Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word that translates to non-harm or non-violence quite literally in English language. It is a principle of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism and is considered to be one of the most important virtues in these religions. Since yoga is a part of Sanatana Dharma, or by extension Hinduism, you see it in many different yogic texts. The most popular one that yoga teachers know about is the Ashtanga Marga in the Yoga Sutras of Maharishi Patanjali, aka Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it's mentioned in the Yama section of the 8 limbs. Now, a common misconception is that Ahimsa comes only as part of the 8 limbs of yoga. In fact, it is available in many different yogic texts across time. For example, it is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 16 and verse 2. It also comes up in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, where it says one must begin Ahimsa and other yamas, the practice of these Ahimsa and other yamas, to purify the mind and prepare for meditation. The Mahabharata also mentions Ahimsa in the Shanti Parva as the highest dharma to be practiced by all. Ahimsa is essentially a life principle. It is a practice of refraining from causing harm to living beings, including yourself, animals, humans, and even plants. It is based on the belief that living beings are interconnected and that harming one can create a ripple effect of harm in the world. The practice of Ahimsa includes not only physical violence, but also mental violence such as anger, greed, hatred, jealousy. It also includes avoiding these actions or avoiding any actions that may harm the environment, such as polluting the world or destroying natural resources or using them in a bad way. Ahimsa is considered to be a fundamental principle of moral behavior in many Indian religions, and it is often associated with compassion, kindness, empathy, and respect for all life. It's believed that by practicing Ahimsa, individuals like you and me can achieve greater spiritual growth, inner peace, and contribute to a more harmonious and peaceful world. Now, examining the word Ahimsa itself, okay, the in Ahimsa is negation in Sanskrit language. Okay. By that, I mean, whenever you want a negative meaning in certain words or the opposite meaning, you put the word or the sound before the root word. For example, himsa is the root word of ahimsa, or the opposite of ahimsa is himsa. Okay? Himsa means harm or violence. Ahimsa is non-violence, non-harm. Some other examples in Sanskrit language would be satya, asatya. Satya is truthfulness. Okay, asatya is the opposite. Abhaya is fearlessness. Bhaya is fearful. Avyakta is manifest or visible. Okay, Vyakta is unmanifest or invisible. Another example would be Amrita, meaning immortal. Mrita means mortal. Okay, so in a sense, Ahimsa is a life principle which translates to non-harm, non-violence, in a sense, kindness to yourself and others. But Ahimsa is more than a do no harm slogan. Okay, make sure you hear that. Ahimsa is more than a do no harm slogan. It means to practice it at all levels, in your words, in your thoughts, and in your actions. So often we have moments in life where we think something, but we say something else. We do something, but we really don't want to do it in that way. So Ahimsa is playing in our lives all the time. Okay, it's in the background, and it is an important life principle in yoga. And I'd like to highlight in the podcast ahead two different sections. One is how to practice ahimsa on your yoga mat, because that's where we will introduce this concept to a lot of our students. And secondly, how to extend it into our lives. And more importantly, how to recognize that ahimsa is actually working, okay, as a life principle. What are your markers for success, if I may call it that? Okay, so that's kind of what we're exploring in the second half of this podcast. In yoga, people today are exposed to the concept of ahimsa in two places. One is through an asana class. The other is for teachers or students in teacher trainings, immersive programs, in workshops. Okay, so a good place to start would be on the mat. It's familiar, it's relatable, and I'm assuming most of your students come regularly, so you can build week on week. Okay. Before you take the life principle of ahimsa off your mat, you first got to be really good about practicing ahimsa on your mat. It needs to become second nature here before it goes out into the world with all your distractions and relationships and issues and other things. Okay. So break this down for your student in class. And I believe adding context is necessary, and it's the responsibility of the yoga teacher in the room. So in this podcast, I'm going to share what I do. Okay. Hoping that it's an inspiration, gives you ideas, a jumping off point, so you can make this even better for yourself. Okay? Before my classes begin, I take a couple of minutes to talk about something simple to add context. Okay. My intention is always to make it relatable. I want to keep it bite-sized. I want it to be easy for them to absorb, because we have only a few minutes and I know they've come from a full day's work, and just to keep their interest enough for them to understand it in that moment, and then I'll build on it in the days and weeks ahead. Okay. Sometimes I talk about breathing. Sometimes I talk about the joy of aging and how yoga can help us. Sometimes I talk about what being present and being mindful is like. And then sometimes I talk about things like ahimsa. Okay. So I explain ahimsa as a life principle that we learn in yoga. And I explain the meaning of the word ahimsa. And I talk about how it has to be practiced in different layers of our lives, and it's more than a do no harm slogan. When we adopt the principle of ahimsa, we are learning to interact better with ourselves and with those around us. And there are a few ways we can do this on our mat. For example, I tell them that the very act of showing up to take care of themselves is ahimsa. Contrary to this, if they were not investing in looking after themselves or looking after their Annamaya and Pranamaya kochas, I would have discussed that previously if I bring it up, then that would be an act of himsa or harm. And then I explain to them that when they move through their practice on that given day and they are challenging themselves, encouraging themselves to stay present, can they be really engaged? Can they be in every moment? That is ahimsa. Noticing what is going on with themselves, that itself is ahimsa. If they were just moving their arms and legs, being completely disconnected, just moving through the motions, then that is an act of himsa. Similarly, if they show up and they're overworking and pushing themselves and not taking options that will rejuvenate them, that's an act of himsa. If they're underworking and being lazy, that's an act of himsa as well. Okay, I always add more context, but I'm just skimming for you right here. I also talk about aging and how, at least I tell them about how I do yoga to age gracefully. That's my main reason. And not looking after ourselves is an act of himsa. It's an act of himsa not only towards us, but an act of himsa to all around us. And as the body, in yoga, we view the body as a vehicle for spiritual growth, right? And not tending to it is an act of himsa. Okay? And that can have a ripple effect on people around us. Then I talk about mental qualities of ahimsa. If you're feeling jealous and envious of somebody who's doing better than you in asana, or you think is doing better than you in asana, that is an act of himsa. If you can be compassionate and happy for them, that is an act of ahimsa. And when you interact with people around you in a yoga room or any room, what's your attitude? Do you approach something with a dismissive tone, with anger, with resentment? Or are you approaching it with a more calm, content, and compassionate attitude? That is ahimsa. So I break this down depending on who's in the room and make it more relatable. But between you and me, the only way people can practice this in their lives is if they remember to do it, if they are intentional about it. Because we as yoga teachers, we meet them for 1 hour once a week, twice a week, maybe thrice a week, and then we're done. but they have got to practice it so much on their mat that it becomes second nature when they're off their mat, and that it becomes default to think and act like this. Okay. So, of course, there'll be moments in life where people will falter and make mistakes. But the beauty of yoga is that you can be in the present moment and you get to start afresh each time. There's no guilt from the past. There's no burden of the future. So it's really beautiful that each breath is almost a new beginning. Okay. So remind your students to make it intentional in bite-sized chunks in their life. They don't have to practice ahimsa from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. But can they practice it in certain moments where they notice they need to be kinder to themselves or others? I give people the example of traffic and rushing to class or road rage. Not that anybody is having road rage, at least I'm not, okay? But to notice those moments that put us under pressure. Because to be honest, these yamas, niyamas, they can be practiced in easy contexts, okay? When life is smooth. It's really, we need them when life is hard, in the tough moments with the tough people, okay? So remember talking about it and how they practice it. Honestly, they have to take responsibility for it. You can show them the way, but they have to do the actions themselves, okay? Now, to recognize if ahimsa is working for you, okay, or if you are able to implement it, there are a few characteristics or qualities or behavioral changes you will notice in yourself. I'm going to give you a few examples. Some of these may be already true for some of you. For some of you, this will be happening at a future point. When you practice ahimsa successfully, you should be able to let go of pain more easily, accept people without judgment. You should be able to give more freely. You should be able to accept more lovingly. You will become more compassionate. You will have greater clarity of thought. You will not be bothered by other people's opinions of you. You won't be bothered by judgment. The past will not trouble you. You are kinder to yourself and those around you. You're more forgiving. You will not let yourself be taken advantage of easily. You will be more respectful. You will have less fear and doubt of yourself. You, by default, end up seeing the good in most people. And you understand that everyone is suffering at some level. You become more compassionate. There's empathy. Kindness is at the forefront of what you do. So some of these qualities will develop as you practice more ahimsa, but help your students recognize this on the mat. Make it so effortless on the mat that when it goes off the mat, it's easy, okay? Or at least easier. Okay? So that's my bite-sized episode for you today. I do have more guests coming up as the seasons are changing and travel is becoming a little more frequent for a lot of people. The guests are also scheduling accordingly. I do have some interesting guests coming up, interesting topics coming up. Meanwhile, I will be dropping solos for you here for you to reflect on. So before I sign off, just a quick reminder about that free workshop, 10 Ways to Elevate Your Yoga Class, is on May 16th, 9 a.m. Pacific time. My bite-sized newsletter is going out. We've sent 3 out already. I love reading your responses. Make sure you're signed up for that. 2 separate links. Both are available in the description of the podcast and on my Instagram link and show notes. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, it would mean the world to us if you can share it with some yoga friends, post it on social media, but most importantly, rate it on Spotify. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, because that's what really moves the needle for us. Okay. Just this episode, this is my 5th attempt at recording it today. We've been running into tech issues all week. So what am I saying? It's a labor of love. It's a free resource. So please help us so we can continue to offer this to you free of cost. Okay. That's it from my end. I hope you are enjoying your warm weather. I will see you next week with another guest, another conversation. And for some of you, I will see you in Tuesday's workshop. Take care. Bye-bye.